Good day, everyone. My name is Annette Johns, and I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Practice with the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Social Workers. I want to begin by saying Happy Social Work Month. This year's theme, 7 Points of Unity, Many Possibilities, celebrates the release of the 2024 CISW Code of Ethics. This new code contains 7 values that guide ethical, inclusive, and empowering social work practice, and the NLCSW has adopted this code for use in NL. In celebration of Social Work Month, I'm happy to be moderator for today's National Education webinar, Adopting Anti-Ableist Approaches in Social Work Practice with Families, Inclusive Strategies for Supporting and Responding to the Needs of Disabled Parents. To make this event more accessible, CSW has added an AI closed captioning and French audio translation service called Interfry. This is a new pilot feature to CSW webinars, and we thank you in advance for your understanding and patience as the AI technology learns the language of the social work profession. I want to let you know as well that CASW is giving away merch to 2 attendees from each of their National Social Work Month webinars. So for your chance to win a free CSW notebook and tote bag, please be sure to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar and let us know what you think how you think social work offers possibilities. So on to today's webinar. Today's webinar presentation will be approximately 60 to 70 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. During the presentation, I encourage you to type in all your questions using the question mark icon to the left of your screen at any time throughout the presentation, and we'll begin answering them towards the end. I now want to introduce our speakers, Amy Goulding and Laura Pacheco. While both of their bios are on the webinar platform, I would like to say a few introductory remarks. Amy is a registered social worker and an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Memorial University. Amy is the director of the Collaborative Anti-Ableism Research and Education in Social Work CARES Lab, which is committed to advancing the field of social work through a multifaceted approach that emphasizes disability justice, mixed methods research, a strong emphasis on community needs, and a dedication to transformative practice. Laura is also a registered social worker and an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Memorial University and adjunct professor in the School of Social Work at McGill University. She has lived experience with disability and has over a decade of community practice and research experience in the field of parents and parenting with intellectual disabilities, with collaborations both nationally and internationally. Such a wealth of knowledge and experience. And Amy and Laura, I'm really looking forward to your presentation today. And I'm now going to turn the virtual platform over to you.
Thank you so much, Annette. That was such a kind intro, right, Laura? Happy Social Work Month, everybody. My name is Amy, and we are incredibly thrilled that you are here with us today, either watching today or watching the recording in the future. We do want to acknowledge and thank the NLCSW and CASW for supporting and promoting this webinar. We want to also acknowledge our colleagues, mentors, students, partners, and funding agencies such as SHRC, who have played vital roles in supporting our research and our work in this area of practice, some of which we'll share with you this morning. And we also wanted to make sure that this webinar was as accessible as possible. So we do want to thank the support of the CASW for ensuring we had closed captioning today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to our moderator, Annette, if you need any support throughout the webinar. Laura and I would like to respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we're gathered as the ancestral unceded homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We'd also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We also acknowledge that disability is a colonial construct, and we recognize the interconnected ways that colonization has impacted disability and disabled people. And it's important to note that Indigenous people with disabilities often face unique barriers that impact their ability to fully participate in their communities. So, as we're together today, we'd like to reflect on the importance of inclusion and accessibility for Indigenous people who have disabilities in particular, as access in itself, we think, can be an act of resistance. We've included a photo here of a piece of art by a neurodiverse Indigenous artist named Dion Fletcher. This piece of art is titled Advancing Colors. Um, and in this piece, she uses porcupine quills, wampum belts, and menstrual blood to reveal the complexities of what defines a body physically and culturally. Um, by reflecting on an Indigenous and gendered body with a neurodiverse mind. So we wanted to share this with you and kind of ground our webinar with this piece of art, and we encourage you to look up this artist if you are interested. So now we'd like to just introduce ourselves, although Annette did such a great job at the beginning. But my name is Amy Golden. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white cisgender woman with short brown hair. I'm wearing dark cat eye glasses today and have lots of freckles on my face. I'm standing in an office space at Memorial that has rainbows, anti-oppressive art, and my favorite and students' favorites, lots of Lego. Professionally, I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at Memorial University. I'm also serving as the director and the founder of the Collaborative Anti-Ableism Research and Education in Social Work Lab, which our team likes to refer to as the CARES Lab. Personally, I identify as a person living with non-visible disabilities. My research centers on disability and reproductive justice, professional praxis, and accessibility. I'm really passionate about supporting disabled social work students, and part of my work is really to increase disability representation within our profession. I position disability as an aspect of human diversity, recognizing the importance of disability culture and communities that sometimes aren't acknowledged within social work spaces. And I'm thrilled to turn it over to Laura, who would also like to introduce herself.
So, hello, everybody. My name is Laura Pacheco, and as Amy mentioned, Annette did a great job in delving into a little bit of who we are. But I use the pronouns she and her. I am a white settler, cisgender woman with a Portuguese background, and I also identify as being disabled. I have blonde shoulder length hair and tan glasses. And like Amy, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work and an adjunct at McGill University in the School of Social Work as well. I've worked in both community and government agencies and have done research, particularly with disabled parents with an intellectual disability. And my research is really centered on disabled parenting and how that interfaces with health and social services, intersecting social identities, and with the goal of dismantling social inequities in society.
So in this session today, we have several objectives, but we also hope that this will be a starting point for discussion within social work as we connect principles of disability justice and the important intersection of parenting. We include a lot of resources at the end as kind of a starting point and jumping off point where you can continue to read and learn more about this topic. So today we're going to summarize the principles of disability justice, explore strategies for fostering inclusive and empowering empowering environments for parents with disabilities. This will include discussing some unique challenges that disabled parents have identified as part of their lived experiences and trajectories to become parents. And we'll talk a little bit about best practices that we've seen in our own work, also that have been identified within the literature for providing culturally competent and inclusive care. So we just wanted to start off explaining a little bit about our language use that we'll use throughout the webinar. So in this presentation, we are conceptualizing disability as a continuum of human variation with unique voices, unique lived experiences. And so because of this, the term disability encompasses developmental and physical disabilities, neurodiversity, chronic illness, chronic pain, mental illness, madness, among others. We're going to use a mix of identity-first disability language and person-first disability language, and acknowledge that different members of the disability communities may have different choices about which they prefer to be recognized by. And we recognize the importance of identity-first language, as this reflects the position that individuals become disabled by their environment, and that disability is a valued part of one's identity. Disableism and ableism we will talk about throughout this presentation. Some disability activists prefer to use the word disableism to ableism because they believe it makes clear that disableism has nothing to do with the person's ability, but that it is a form of discrimination. So in general, ableism can be used to describe the way society and people tend to favor non-disabled people. So to get us started, we would just like to have you engage with this polling question. And given how we are conceptualizing disability in this presentation, we wonder, how many Canadians do you think are living with a disability?
So we're just giving you a few seconds there to respond to the question.
Okay, so the majority of you did very well. It is correct that 20% and higher of Canadians self-identify as living with a disability. This is almost 22% of the population, or 6.2 million Canadians, and this would be age 15 years and over. So this statistic by Statistics Canada does not include even age 15 and younger. So this would be even higher than 22%. Disability, though, isn't always obvious, and this is a point that we wanted to make really clear on this slide. The 10 disability types identified in the Canadian Survey on Disability include seeing, hearing, mobility, flexibility, dexterity, pain-related, learning, developmental, mental health-related, and memory. So from this list, we can deduce that many disabilities are sometimes difficult to view. And so even though this still affects a large swath of Canadians. So thank you everybody for participating in this poll. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the disability justice framework. We think that this framework intersects very well with our code of ethics and our standards of practice and our general objectives for social work practice. So a little bit about how the disability justice movement, which is often considered a movement, began. In 2005, disabled people, many who were part of the LGBTQIA+ community and many people of color, began discussing a second wave of disability rights. Many of these first conversations happened between Patty Byrne and Mia Mingus, and their visioning soon expanded to include many others. The conversations evolved over time at conferences, over the phone, etc. And they launched the framework that we now consider to be disability justice to get today. We have many social workers who practice using the disability justice principles, many who are quite vocal in our profession about disability justice and the intersection of social work. So we support you to take a peek in terms of who some of those pioneers are. So disability justice is a developing framework that many call a movement. Some voices may emphasize a specific aspect of disability justice over another. However, what's been consistent across disability justice and remains to be so is that the leadership of disabled people of color and those of queer and gender nonconforming disabled people are really taking the lead. So the disability justice framework has several principles that it's based on. We can see these here on the slide, that all bodies are unique and essential. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. And all bodies are confined by ability, race, gender, sexuality, class, nation state, religion, and more. And these are inseparable. SINS Invalid is a disability justice organization that centers the experiences and voices of disabled people, particularly those, as I mentioned, who identify as queer, transgender, and people of color. And so SINS Invalid is cited here on this slide because they are the organization that offered this framework to us and the preceding principles. These here would be the 10 principles of disability justice, and we're going to consider at the end of our presentation how we can use disability justice principles to support disabled parents in the community. So SINS Invalid, their work is grounded in these 10 guiding principles that serve as a framework for disability justice advocacy and activism. Some of these will look very familiar to you as we talk a lot about these in social work, such as intersectionality, where we're recognizing that individuals hold multiple identities and experiences, which include disability, race, gender, and the interconnections between these identities. I won't go over all of these in depth now because we'll talk about them more at the end, but these are easily accessible on our slide deck. So we think that disability justice principles and framework are closely connected with social work ethics and our standards of practice. There's many examples I think we could provide of this, how we see these playing out with families, but here are just three to consider. Our commitment to social justice, our ethical duty, and our core values. So, for instance, in our core values, emphasizing empathy, respect for diversity, and the importance of human relationships would be consistent across our core values and the disability justice framework. So, disabled people have experienced a long history of eugenics in Canada, which we do need to consider as we are talking about parenting today. So, for example, thousands of people with intellectual disabilities experienced non consensual sterilization in Canada during the eugenics movement from the 30s to the 70s. And even though forced and coerced sterilization is no longer legal in Canada, non-consensual sterilization continues to disproportionately inflict disabled women and Indigenous people. Um, so the Senate of Canada Standing Committee on Human Rights has raised this as an ongoing concern for contemporary practices and made an urgent call to action to end this practice. So, reproductive justice aims to protect the fundamental rights of individuals related to their reproductive choices. This includes the rights and freedom to choose to have children, the ability to parent respectfully, and the autonomy to decide one's sexuality and body. Um, The ability to make decisions about one's sexuality and body often requires access to information and services for disabled people that should be accessible um, and grounded within the principles of disability justice and anti-ableism. Advancing reproductive justice in social work, we think, is really important and crucial for disabled people because some of the norms and stereotypes can begin in childhood, and these can perpetuate harmful perceptions of disabled people, which can have adverse experiences as they transition into parenthood later on. We wanted to introduce the term here, passive eugenics, that we identify as policies and practices that perhaps unintentionally discourage reproduction among certain populations. And so we conceptualize this as disabled parents and disabled people who have limited access to reproductive health and postpartum care that meets their needs, for example. Their experience of ableism and disableism, and poor relationships with providers, as these factors can unintentionally discourage reproduction and family planning, and we would center this as an example of experiencing passive eugenics. And so I'm now going to turn the slide deck over to Laura. Whenever you're ready, Laura.
Wonderful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we know from the research related to disabled parents, and of course the experiential knowledge of disabled parents. And as I'm talking about this, I'd like for you to think about what this has to do with practice, and we'll give you some ideas in terms of what the links are. But what we know from the literature is that in Canada, 1 in 8 pregnancies is to a person with a disability. And in Quebec, 1 in 5 parents has a disability or a chronic illness. So this means that those of you that are here with us today have either probably worked with a disabled parent, are working with a disabled parent or will be working with a disabled parent, and perhaps a disabled parent yourself. So what we're going to be talking about today, we hope is relevant to all of you, given that you probably have some experiences in some way with disabled parents. We also know from the literature that there's over 3 decades of research on and with disabled parents. And most of this research is on and with parents with intellectual disabilities. The research is primarily based on clinical samples, which means that we only have a particular portrait of disabled parents. So we have some findings related to disabled parents that are users of health and social services, but we know less about the perspectives of disabled fathers, of disabled parents with intersecting social identities. And this is really important for future directions within our whole profession, within research and also in practice. Research also suggests that IQ and disability is not a predictor of parenting ability. I want us to think about this, and I want us to think about how there are reports and assessments maybe that we have seen that have used IQ alone to identify a parent's incapacity. Well, we know that through the literature that this is not substantiated, and that if we only look at disability as incapacity, that is discriminatory. We also know that disabled parents are a heterogeneous group, so they have diverse intersecting social locations, family forms, living situation, strengths, and needs. So it's really important that we're not generalizing, except when we talk about systemic barriers. So this is what disabled parents often have in common is the intersection social identity of being a parent and having a disability within an ableist society. So I have been asked before in practice many times about what a parent's functioning could be prior to meeting the parent. And that's an example of discrimination or trying to ask for a generalization when that's not possible. So we also know that parents with an intellectual disability are the largest proportion of disabled parents associated with health and social services. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So as I was mentioning before, there are some unique circumstances related to being a disabled parent within our hegemonic society. So parents have talked about the intersecting levels of oppression that they experience, and many families live below the poverty line. And that's a really important finding because we talked about IQ before and how that doesn't have a correlation with parenting, but poverty and the impact of poverty on mental distress is really something that we need to be exploring and focused on in both research and also in our practices. We also know that parents with disabilities or disabled parents have poor pregnancy and birth outcomes, such as preterm delivery, preeclampsia, low birth weight, and we need to be looking at these particular outcomes and the link that this has with child outcomes as well, instead of looking at parental ability and child outcomes. We know that parents with disabled parents have a heightened risk of poor physical and mental distress, in that a lot of these families, this poor health is related to social location. So socioeconomic status, low levels of social support, and social isolation. We really cannot underestimate the impact that social isolation has on the everyday lives of everyone, but particularly disabled families or disabled parents. And it's something that we need to investigate further, both on clinical and also on research levels. Disabled families have also reported that they have limited supports from family or friends, particularly that they lack support that is deemed competence promoting. So this competence promoting support is empowering support, whereas inhibiting support is support that can take over, that can denigrate the parent, or can assume that because of their disability that they will not be able to parent adequately. So I was talking a little bit about parents with intellectual disabilities before, but what we know is that 60 to 80% of parents with intellectual disabilities will have their children removed from their care temporarily or permanently. And from what we know, and the numbers are a bit skewed, but parents with intellectual disabilities make up approximately 1% of the total population. So when you compare that to 60 to 80% of these parents having their children removed from their care, you really see this overrepresentation. We also know from the literature that child apprehension are 4 to 5 times greater when the parent has an intellectual disability or a cognitive impairment. We also know from parents that, as I talked about before, there's limited support, but also support that may be uncoordinated within the social service system. So these families talked about having different supports from different organizations, which can sometimes be overwhelming and confusing. And we'll talk a little bit later about coordinated supports and the value of family and parent-centered supports in a little bit. The literature also shows that many disabled parents do not receive inclusive services, or that services do not consider their access needs. So for example, the learning and diverse communication styles and preferences. And why this is really important to reflect upon is that a lot of the times parents, particularly when they're involved with service systems in child welfare, um, are given a chance to prove themselves. So they're given services in order to show that they can improve their parenting situation or parenting capacity. But when services are not accessible or do not consider access needs, these services probably will not be beneficial to these parents. And unfortunately, what the research shows is that then it can be identified that the parent isn't progressing in the service provision, or that they're not integrating the skills, when it could actually be because services have not been adapted to their particular access needs. We talked a little bit about this before, and Amy touched upon it as well, that many disabled parents report experiencing the myths and misconceptions regarding their ability to parent based on their ability alone, on their disability alone, sorry. It should be based on their ability, but it's could be based mostly on their disability. And this is also an example of ableism within our society and within some of our systems. We also know that the system in itself is sometimes oriented towards what's in the best interest of the child, but that the family connection and reunification of disabled parents is less likely to be encouraged. So what this means is that disabled families will often have less supports around parenting. So let's say parenting education, or less support around intimate partner violence, and when we compare them to their non-disabled peers. And so these are things that I want us to reflect upon, is that why might that be the case? Why is there such discrepancies between non-disabled and disabled parents? We also know that because parents with disabled parents are overrepresented within the child welfare system that they experience a lot of the time disenfranchised grief and loss. So many of these parents will live with the pain and the loss without acknowledgement, sometimes from their family or service providers, of this particular loss, and oftentimes will not receive trauma care that is accessible to them. This here is a quote of a disabled mom who is in one of my studies, and she talks about her experience, and it is the last experience that she had with two of her children. So it is a difficult quote, but I will read it. So it says, "I remember the last few moments together. I gave them each a prayer angel, and then I held them each in my arms and gave them a big hug. I told them that I loved them, no matter what. I held my tears back, especially when I heard Elizabeth yelling, 'Mommy, no.' That was really hard. Really, really hard. The hardest thing I have ever been through." So you obviously see the pain that this mother went through, and many of the mothers go through, and it it helps us to reflect upon the importance not only of ensuring that we are not replicating oppression, but that we're also providing trauma-informed care to these families. So we talked a lot about the systemic variables and some of the oppression that disabled families face, but we also wanted to talk about the positive contributions of being raised by a parent with a disability, because there really is a tendency in both research and practice to really focus on the struggles or the difficulties. And we know that there are some positive contributions, and that there are some assumptions that are really assumptions. And those are pieces that we need to be able to label them as assumptions. So the positive contributions of being raised by a parent, a disabled parent, is that the children talk about having increased empathy, resilience, and resistance, particularly in face of discrimination, and will stand up. A lot of the times when they have seen some inappropriate actions towards their peers. There's an increased understanding of interdependence. So some of these children talked about the notion that, providing mutual support to each other, and that their disabled parent, had an important role to play, just like their other family members, like their grandmother and their aunt, and that everybody had a role to play in raising them. For disabled children, they may experience a greater sense of belonging having a disabled parent, and having a parent that has an understanding of parts of their lived experience. And they might also have a potential disabled role model that for a parent, for a non-disabled child, for a disabled child that doesn't have a disabled parent, they might not have that role model, particularly within their family. We also know that the children become more inclusive and focused on social justice, and see that as something that's really important, not only for them, but also for their family. So we wanted to show you a video, and this is a video that is by Dr. Marjorie Onos, who is an international expert in the field of parenting with intellectual disabilities, who is also a disabled mom. And this part of the video really focuses on the creative solutions that are enacted by disabled parents. And so we wanted to share this with you, as an extension of our conversation around the strengths of disabled parents and their families. So I will play it now. Oops. I will play.
are some of my favorite examples of creative solutions from disabled parents. A mom I know who has a vision impairment wanted to take her kids to the park, but she wanted to find a way to be able to track them in the playground. So she put bells on their sneakers. That was her creative solution. Another mom I know who has an intellectual disability knew she couldn't help her son with his math homework. She accepted and moved on and found someone else from her church community who could tutor him. What worked for their family was to not get frustrated on something she knew full well she couldn't do, but rather team up with someone else who could be more helpful. When Thomas was still a toddler, he didn't want to get into the bath one night. And so he hid under the table in that one corner he knew I couldn't reach. So I blew bubbles to lure him out and into the tub. What I have learned from disabled parents and from becoming one myself is this: I don't need to understand why something's broken to fix it. When we stop focusing on problems and start finding solutions, it will save us time and resources. And maybe money too, as we won't need all of those parenting books. So, what can a non-disabled parent learn from all of this? Well, consider a child who's not sleeping through the night. The cause of not sleeping through the night may be very different for different families. For some, and the solutions too, and so for some families, they will be okay with a co-sleeping arrangement. For others, it's going to be a sleep training program. Someone who has more financial means might hire a sleep nanny, when another family who has similar financial means would never approve of it. The point is this: we may not need to spend months trying to figure out why our child is not sleeping through the night. Your family needs rest, focus on solutions. As parents, we do the best we can with what we have. So next time you see a parent in your community or on TikTok, don't judge them too harshly. But do ask yourself this question: which creative solutions are they using right now? And if ever you've come across a parent with a disability, don't judge or don't pay attention to what they don't have that you do, but rather focus on what they do have that you don't. And maybe they will teach you something new. Thank you.
So I really love showing that video because it really focuses on some of not only the creative solutions, but how we can really shift our thinking, and also when we're looking at assessments, what we can be also looking for. We need to be looking for these strengths. I did forget to mention that Dr. Marjorie Onos lives in Montreal, Quebec, and has, if you look her up, she has her own YouTube channel and has lots of resources on that site as well. So one of the questions that we often get asked about when we're talking about disabled parents is, well, what about the children? What about the impact on the children? How does this impact them and their development? Are they always parentified? Some of the questions that we get asked are related to, will they outwit or outgrow their parents intellectually? And what we would say is that all children and families are diverse, and that also includes children of disabled parents. And from the literature, what we can see is that there are really diverse developmental trajectories. Children of disabled parents fare well, particularly compared to peers from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. So we know that, again, it's not necessarily the intellectual disability, but more related to living under the poverty line due to living in hegemonic society. Children themselves have talked about the stigma and social exclusion that they sometimes will go through because of having a disabled parent. And they also identify this because they know that they live in an ableist society and know that we value certain bodies and minds over others. So the children in some of the studies have been able to make those links between their experiences. Children of parents with intellectual disability may experience developmental speech and language and developmental differences. But again, those studies have been diverse in terms of their results and again tend to be with clinical samples. So there's still a lot more research that we need to do. What we do seem to know is that there's a complex interplay of personal variables related to the child and also experience. So availability of community resources, so supports for the child, the parent, the family, those can have an impact on the child's life. Internal factors, relationships that they have. So whether that's relationships with their parent, a caregiver, a big brother, a sibling, an auntie, these are all really important pieces to their lives. Their home environment as well in terms of their interactions. And what many of them will say, so there's been a few studies with adults of disabled parents and teenagers of disabled parents. Many of them will say that they want to live and certainly be connected to their disabled parent. And, you know, when we're talking about children and families, one of the pieces to remember is that for most families, it takes a village. It takes, you know, sometimes there's a few people in the family that are supporting parenting and that are cooking and providing different pieces within that family. And so the video that we wanted to show you is related to a podcast that Dr. Marjorie Onos has done with the Minnesota Child Welfare Organization, where she's interviewed researchers and practitioners and also families. So this is a video of Dr. Onos talking to two adolescents, they're both 18, about their experiences, and they have come together to call it "It Takes a Village to Raise a Child." And I just wanted us to have a listen together in terms of what do they say about their family and who's in their family.
Who is your family and how would you describe your family?
Well, obviously I'm Elizabeth and Lily's my twin. We also then have our mum, our three aunties that we're very close to, and their kids, which I think we have 8 cousins. And then we have Shelley and Nikki who looked after our mum when she was younger, and her children, their children. And then we have Margaret and all the Spencers and all that. We also have Susan Collins. Then we have Marianne and, well, we have 2 Mariannes, and then one of them has a partner called Normie. And then our friends. It's very like supportive kind of group. Yeah.
Well, what's amazing to me is that, I mean, I know a bit about your life, obviously, through Margaret. But I had not realized how many people is sort of in your circle. And, you know,
Yeah,
people from your
everyone.
mom's world, from Margaret's world. Do you want to tell me a little bit, you know, about who Marg is to you, and which part, you know, does she play, and which part each of them sort of play? Maybe not like each of them, but sort of like in general, what do they do for you, or how do they help, or what's their role in your lives?
Well, Margaret, she's kind of like, I guess, our grandmother in a way. She we like go to her when we can't like have help from our mum, because she doesn't understand like our schoolwork. Yeah, so we always go to her if we need help with any schoolwork that we know our mum can't quite
Help us with.
handle. Well, Susan, we actually grew up with some of her boys a little bit when we were younger. Yeah. That's
So
pretty
each
much.
person sort of has like their role in a way, in
Yeah.
their lives, right? And I
Yeah.
guess whenever you need sort of help, or just have fun, each of them sort of have that role.
Yeah.
That's pretty so that's pretty special, because, you know, yeah, it's sort of like a big sort of village all around you guys, and you get to
Yeah.
have sort of the best of both worlds, sort of your life with your mom and then with everybody else.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, what would be the thing that you love the most about your mom?
Well, she always asks us if we need anything before she leaves, when she goes out. She always asks how school was when she's home, and always continues to check up on us. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. It's interesting that you're saying that, because you're both 18, so you're both now sort of adults, which is
Yeah.
like a big thing. And as you know, I have a son, and my son is about to turn 12, and he's at that age where all of the things that you just mentioned is like horrible. Like he can't, you know, sort of fathom, oh my God, you're asking me again. And so it's funny that I don't know if you had that phase with your mom at some point where it was like, oh, but it gives me hope. It gives me hope, because I'm like, okay, well, maybe in 6 years it's going to come back.
Yeah.
So that's great. Are there things that are difficult with your mom?
I think certain things we try to explain to her, and if we can't explain it like again or properly, we just simplify it as much as we can. And if she doesn't understand it, then we'll get someone else to explain to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way of doing that. And I guess that's how, you know, you'll get sort of other people from your network that you mentioned, sort of
Yeah.
to help you out in that respect. And I have
Yeah.
to say, I mean, for sure, you know, in terms of your mom, who is a lovely lady who may need, you know, some extra help in understanding certain things. But I would say that with anybody, in terms of like kids and parents, you know, like Thomas sometimes goes to my mom and sort of says like, oh, can you like come down and help out with that? So I don't think it has anything to do, you know, or it's not as specific as someone might think, in terms of like, this is the intellectual disabilities or the learning difficulties that create that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we all need sort of a little sort of distance from, or someone else to sort of help out to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we are. That was the video from Beth and Lily talking about their experience and the importance that the village has had in their life, and in obviously the love that they have for their mom. So we have a question for all of you in relation to, so I'll read it out. So according to the literature, when parents with intellectual disabilities receive support that meets their needs, the chance of child removal goes from 60 to 80% to 50%, 40%, 2 to 20%, or there is absolutely no change. So we will give you some time to sort of think about this, but this is according to the literature. And when parents receive support that meets their access needs, the chance of child removal goes from 60 to 80% to what? 50%, 40%, 2 to 20%, or there is no change. So we'll give you a little bit of time to think about this. And just identify what you think it could be. Okay, so I'm getting lots of responses are coming in. So let me show this to you. So most of you, 70.73%, said 2 to 20%. You are absolutely right. Fantastic. So what does this mean? This means that when disabled parents are given supports that are accessible to them in relation to different access needs, but particularly in relation to parents with intellectual disabilities, that they can integrate some of the support and that it can be beneficial to them, particularly when we're looking at parenting support. And Amy will talk a little bit more about some of those best practices and how that correlates with a disability justice orientation. So I'm now handing it back over to Amy.
Laura, this is great news. This is good news. And so we wanted to break down the disability justice principles and offer some social work practice strategies that we think would be beneficial when working with disabled parents. Many of these we as social workers are already integrating into our practice, which is absolutely fantastic. This is closely connected to anti-oppressive social work practice, where we are confronting systemic inequality and oppression, and also recognizing the lived experiences of the folks that we are supporting and serving. So, and feel free, Laura, to jump in as I go through, because I know you also have a lot of practice examples that are really helpful throughout the strategy section.
Perfect.
So in terms of intersectionality, and I mentioned some pieces about intersectionality at the beginning, where we are recognizing that individuals hold multiple identities and experiences, and understanding the interconnections between these identities. So here we offer suggestions of creating and delivering assessments, support plans, and interventions through an intersectional lens, where we recognize the intersecting identities, including disability, among the folks that we are supporting. This also includes acknowledging and providing resources on oppression within assessments and interventions as well. And I think part of this we would just preface with saying that we think that building a really strong therapeutic alliance and rapport with disabled parents should really be the foundation of all of these principles and what we're doing in our work. Leadership of the most impacted is the notion that we really try to elevate the voices and leadership of disabled people in particular. And so here we offer to the suggestion to develop practice standards and guidelines for working with people with disabilities and their families with disabled communities. So this is more so a collaborative approach where we are recognizing the expertise and experience of disabled families, of disabled communities, and then integrating this expertise and lived experience within our practices and guidelines. Anti-capitalist politics refers to challenging the capitalist system that can perpetuate inequality and advocating for economic justice for disabled people. And so here we suggest embracing person-centered practices that supports agency and self-determination. Laura talked a lot about how disabled parents are a very diverse and heterogeneous group. So this recognizes the importance of person-centered and family-centered practices. Commitment to cross-movement organizing within the disability justice principles lends itself to building alliances and solidarity with other social justice movements. And so here we offer increasing the visibility of people with disabilities in social justice movements is really important. Sometimes we tend to minimize disability as a part of identity. And so increasing the visibility of persons with disabilities and also disabled social workers, I think is really important.
Mhm.
And then we have recognizing wholeness. And so this refers to ensuring that accessibility goes beyond just physical accommodations. So this would include emotional, cultural, and political accessibility and creating spaces where disabled parents feel welcome and included. And so this is really important if we consider that when services and support that meets the accessibility needs of our parents are met, this can completely change the trajectory of our families. And so we want to ensure that the services that we're providing are accessible and recognize wholeness. Sustainability, we suggest here centering support on well-being and quality of life that's guided by the priorities, rights, and lived experiences of people with disabilities. I think this closely connects to Marjorie's video, where she's talking a little bit about like recognizing the solutions. And so this practice can be part of this principle of sustainability. And creating long-term supports that families can access over the life course. Commitment to cross-disability solidarity, we suggest support self-advocacy movements, the development of peer support and mutual aid groups, and ensuring collaboration between organizations. So again, this reflects the foundation that folks with lived experiences can offer expertise that is very important for us to consider when we're offering services and supports. Is there anything on this slide you'd like to add, Laura? Or I'm okay to keep going?
You're okay to keep going. It sounds good. I might just sort of say that in relation to ensuring collaboration between organizations, like you mentioned, Amy, that disabled-led organizations are certainly at the center, and that purposeful and structured communication between organizations can be really important to disabled-led families because there can be so many organizations involved.
Great, thank you so much. And we're moving on to our last three principles. So interdependence is a really important disability justice principle because this is embracing the idea that all individuals are interconnected and reliant on each other, rather than promoting independence as the ultimate goal. So here we suggest engaging in power neutralizing practices that respect individuals' autonomy and rights. So supported decision making, dignity of risk, which connects closely to our value of self-determination within social work, acknowledging interdependence and avoiding stigmatizing persons with disabilities as dependent on supports. And then collective access recognizes that access is a collective responsibility and working collaboratively to create accessible environments and communities. So we did touch a bit on this in the wholeness principle. We suggest here that normalizing access needs and ensuring that services supports are accessible to all people should really be a basic expectation. So recognizing that folks have diverse needs for accessing supports and services, and at the very least, we should make sure that these are accessible. Exploring how spaces and places can be inclusive, exploring diverse learning and communication styles, and meaningful participation. And then our last principle, collective liberation, refers to striving for the liberation of all people and understanding that disability justice can't be achieved without addressing other forms of oppression. So Laura mentioned trauma-informed care, specifically when referring to this predominant lived experience of grief that's sometimes experienced by disabled parents. And so here we do suggest respond to collective trauma through the provision of trauma-informed care as a way to avoid re-victimization. And Laura, I'll just give you some space to add if you wanted to comment on any of these last three.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I mean, Amy really delved into the principles so nicely. And maybe what I would just add that Amy already mentioned is that we're acknowledging interdependence and that, and the reason I'm re-emphasizing it is because disabled parents are often labeled as unable if they're not able to do it on their own. So parenting capacity assessments are usually focused on one parent. And so this puts disabled parents at a disadvantage, and it actually puts all families at a disadvantage because, as Amy mentioned, you know, independence is a myth. And just wanted to also add in relation to trauma-informed care that for some disabled parents who have experienced trauma, that can come out as quote unquote being resistant or non-collaborative. And once they're labeled as that, that could actually have an impact on their trajectory, especially within child welfare. Parents that are labeled as non-collaborative and or resistant have their cases more open longer in child welfare. So, you know, Amy was really important that Amy emphasized on that. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Laura. And now I'm going to actually pass it over to you to chat a little bit more about critically reflexive practices.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. So we know that critical self-reflection is part of all of your practice. It's something that is at the heart of social work practice across settings, as Amy has already mentioned. But given that we know that disabled parents can often face attitudinal barriers, it's that much more important to engage in critically reflective practices that really requires us to center our work on social justice and disability justice principles, committing ourselves to this lifelong learning, and that we're turning that gaze in relation to the systemic violence that disabled parents often face. And these critically reflective practices are really based on experiential knowledge, as Amy already had mentioned, but that we're really taking that in praxis as well. And identifying the different ways in which disabled parents are oppressed, but also how they are resistant is a part of this critically reflexive practice, and something that can really transform our work. And we also acknowledge, and this is something that has come out of our work as well, is that professionals need to have support and resource allocation in order to do critical reflexive practice and be engaged in socially transformative action. So we know that it does take place in space in order to do this important work, but given our social work values and our social work orientations, we feel that that's really central to the work that we do. So we're sort of going towards the end of our presentation, and Amy, also please feel free to jump in. But we just wanted to share a few resources to support disabled parents that we hope will be helpful for you as you continue to work and engage with disabled families. We have at the end of the presentation other resources that you can access. Amy has put the links there, and there's a description also of each of these resources, but we wanted to sort of talk about a few of them briefly. So the first one is called the Disabled Parenting Project, and this is a website that's really for disabled parents, that's put up by the National Research Center for Parents with Disabilities, who also does a lot of research in the field. And it's really a space for disabled parents to connect and share resources and also receive mutual support. We also wanted to bring your attention towards access and equity, and this is a disabled informed practice in child welfare guideline. It really is an excellent tool. It summarizes some of the best practices in relation to assessments, and also incorporates a disability justice type of lens in there as well. It is from Australia, but there is a dearth of information in there, or a lot of information, not dearth, a lot of information in there that would be applicable to child welfare practices here in Canada. And so these are a few of our other resources. The Parent-Centered planning a new model for working with parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Is an actual model that has been put together based on the research and experiential knowledge, and is there to support the building of formal and informal parenting supports for parents and their children. Amy, is there anything that you would add to any of this?
No, I think this is a great overview. And again, there's a lot of resources we've listed on the subsequent slides. We're just kind of highlighting these four. We're familiar with them and feel comfortable sending you off to kind of look at them a little bit more in more detail. But lots of great resources that are available that are not included on the slide deck. Lots of great examples within social work as well in terms of how we're supporting disabled parents. So thanks, Laura, for going over those with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. So you'll find them on the next few slides. So I'm going to just, stroll through them, but they're there for you to have a look, and that they are all accessible and ready to be explored and used. We, we're so happy that we have gotten to spend this time with you and share some of the research and strategies, and also the underpinnings of disability justice, and really hope that this will provide some tools and a greater understanding and continue critical reflexivity and transformative action with disabled families. So we thank you very much for being here today. We really look forward to engaging with you at some point. You have our information. Both of our emails are there in this slide, and you also have the slide deck available to you. So thank you. Amy, I don't know if you want to share any last words.
That was great to sum us up. I also just want to echo Laura and say thank you for all of our viewers today. Also the NLCSW and CASW, again, for promoting and supporting this webinar. We really are thankful. As you can probably tell, this work is very important to both Laura and I. And so having this opportunity to share some of these pieces with you is very meaningful. So I love that this is a way that we're starting off our social work month, Laura.
Oh, yes. Fantastic.
Annette, I think that you are on mute. I can't hear you.
Thank you so much. I thought I pressed the unmute button. Just want to say thank you for this excellent presentation. So we have arrived at our Q&A, and we do have a couple questions that's come in. So the first one, this person is noting that they work with children with disabilities, and often in the intake process, the parents express their desire for their child to begin talking or to be able to do things that their child's peers can do. And to this person, this speaks to the pressure on guardians to have able-bodied children. How would you suggest that I shape my practice to create an anti-ableist environment while also honoring the parents' wishes for their child's development? I don't know who wants to take a lead on that question.
Wow, this is such an important question. Laura, do you want to start us off?
Sure. It is such an important question, and I really appreciate the reflection behind how do we take anti-ableism theories when we're sitting in front of a family who is asking about their child and who is saying that they want to have support so that their child can increase in their abilities. I mean, in social work, we do have to begin with where families are at. So certainly creating a safe place for that family in the work that you're doing and sort of getting an understanding of where they're at. And hopefully it's a family that you can engage with over time and that you can bring in the diverse perspectives of children and families and how there's lots of diversity there. And so I think that's a really important piece. Amy, is there anything you would add?
I think those are great points. My other suggestion is also to recognize the value of peer support.
Yes.
So I found in my practice that sometimes this can be really helpful if you can connect parents with other parents um, who are who are having similar experiences within their parenting journey. I would echo Laura that to begin where the family is at, with respect and compassion, of course, and focusing on what they need in terms of support. And so I I like how Marjorie really framed this in terms of focusing on solutions. And it makes me think of, are folks familiar with, okay, I'm just asking, but de Shazer's key metaphor within solution focused therapy, where he talks about sometimes if we are in a room of locked doors and we are trying to get through the door to increase our quality of life, we get over fixed on why the door is locked. When if we just unlock the door with a key and go through, we'll be able to find a solution or at least increase our quality of life. So I think, and I did not do that metaphor justice, so you'll have to Google DeShazer key metaphor. But the idea is that we don't over focus on why the door is locked, but we work on finding the key to kind of go through the door. So there's lots of resources though online. The Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital is a resource that I would recommend to anybody. They have a ton of resources, parenting guides, and a lot of peer-to-peer support that can be really helpful. So if folks need help connecting or with resources, feel free to reach out and I'm happy to follow up with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura and Amy. We have another question that's come in. So, someone is wondering about what your thoughts are on hidden or unrecognized disabilities. And the comment being that often people don't know, do not want the label of a disability and will not advocate for themselves in that way. And also, many don't understand the person and environment context issue, so internalize the stigma and won't speak up when they are disabled or even recognize the issue. So someone's just wondering about your thoughts around that.
Laura, did you want to start us off again? Or would you like me to start?
You start off this time.
Okay,
If that's okay.
I think Annette needs to repeat the first part of the question.
Okay, yeah. It's around thoughts. What are your thoughts on hidden or unrecognized disabilities? So often people don't want the label of a disability, and will not advocate for themselves in that way. So, and not understanding the person environment, so will internalize that stigma and won't speak up or even recognize the issue. So, just some of your thoughts around that.
I mean, this is another great question. I think a bit context dependent, but I think it's a really important point because not all folks are comfortable recognizing disability as a piece of their identity and an aspect of diversity. And so in my professional practice, I always try to refer to clients and families how they are referring to themselves. So I think it's important to not share a label if that's not something that they self-identify. I think that's completely okay. We talked a little bit about person first language and identity first language at the beginning, and we wanted to start off with this in terms of language use because we really do think that folks should have autonomy to self-refer to themselves. So in terms of the second part, Laura, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'd also like to say that I think it's a really important question, and that the social worker is really thinking about some of the tensions that some of the families that we work with, and even some of the people that we know on our own social networks can experience. Right? Is having an understanding that we live in an ableist society and internalizing that. What's interesting is that we only saw part of Marjorie's video, but the beginning part of Marjorie's video talks about how she was able-bodied, and so this is not it's not. I'm paralleling it in a way, but so she began as able-bodied and then was in a car accident and became disabled. And what she struggled with in terms of internalizing that disability. So just to say, as Amy said, is that this journey can really be a unique journey, and our role as workers is to have knowledge of not only of different frameworks, but the ways in which internalized ableism can impact people's lives, and that it can be something that is discussed in practice if that's where, of course, the person is at. But it's a it's one of those pieces where we really, as Amy was talking about before, we really need to build those therapeutic alliances so that we can create these safe spaces and have these sometimes difficult discussions.
I just had a follow-up thought as you were chatting, Laura, because I'm glad that one of our attendees brought up internalized ableism, because this is very important to discuss, and we actually didn't talk a lot about it in the presentation. I'll share a little bit from my doctoral research, where I met with young folks who self-identified as disabled throughout Ontario, and talked to them a bit about, well, talked to them a lot actually about sexuality and sexual well-being. And many of them, if not most of them, did talk about this experience of internalized ableism, and accepting kind of misconceptions and myths about themselves, such as, I won't be able to have children, I'll never find a partner who can tolerate me, etc. So lots of unhelpful thoughts, as Laura mentioned, that are very ingrained within our societal norms, and ableism, of course. But something that was really interesting was, and I conceptualize this as young folks going through this process of demarginalization. This is how I kind of termed it in my work, in that when they had increased exposure to folks with similar identities or similar lived experiences, they started to be able to recognize this internalized ableism within themselves and start to expand how they thought about the self, the world, and the future. And so, again, I think the peer-to-peer support, the collaboration with community, with folks with lived experiences is really important, especially for young folks. And this can be on, various various things such as social media, through school, through social worker, through their healthcare setting. Them having opportunities to explore themselves with others can be a really important, not intervention, but approach for responding to internalized ableism. So we could talk more about this, but maybe in the next webinar.
I like that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I'm sure we could go on for a much longer period of time. So we're going to clue up our Q&A period, but I just want to, if there's any final remarks based on the question and answer, anything you thought about through the webinar, Amy and Laura, that you just wanted to note before I do some concluding remarks.
Not for me, but I just want to shout out to everyone who came and cares about disability justice. And, our contact information is here on the slide. We really do welcome you to reach out to both of us or either or and continue this conversation. So we're really, really thankful that folks came to engage with us today.
Yeah, and we hope that this is just, that the conversation continues in one way or the other.
Excellent. So I do want to take this moment to thank Amy and Laura for facilitating this excellent webinar for us today and for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and experience with us. It is truly, truly appreciated. As attendees, we hope this webinar, as Laura and Amy said, provided you with some knowledge and tools that you can use to support parents with disabilities across all fields of practice. And I heard from someone in the chat there that in terms of their work in community development, that they're now looking at, the material that was presented and how they can adopt anti-ableist approaches in their work that they do. So I'm sure we sparked lots of interest in continued learning on this topic. The PDF of the PowerPoint slides is available in the resource section on the webinar platform for those that want to have access to those. And the NLCSW continues to develop practice resources and host education sessions like this today that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can also review NLCSW's cultural competence and social practice document that fits with this focus. And that document is also available on the resource section of the platform and on the NLCSW website. RSWs in this province, Newfoundland and Labrador, may claim 1.5 required CPE credits for attending the webinar today as per the NLCSW CPE policy. And social workers tuning in from across Canada can consult their CPE requirements in the jurisdictions in which you are registered. So as you begin to sign off, we do ask that you complete the survey that will appear on the screen. Participant feedback is always so greatly appreciated. And again, for National Social Work Month, completing this survey gives you the chance to win some great CASW swag. So get those surveys completed. Thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and all of the Social Work Month activities and events.
Thank you so much, Annette.
Thank you.